Let me make something very clear to all of you. The Sterling family has been building power and influence in this state for over 70 years. We have relationships with judges, prosecutors, politicians, and business leaders that go back generations. If you think you can destroy my daughter's happiness and walk away unscathed, you are gravely mistaken. The threat hung in the air like poison gas, and Elena felt the first real fear she'd experienced since arriving in Malibu. They'd been so focused on finding their father that they'd never considered the enemies they might make in the process. Harrison Sterling wasn't just wealthy, he was connected, ruthless, and had the resources to destroy them in ways they couldn't even imagine. "Are you threatening my daughters?" Richard asked, his voice deadly quiet. Harrison's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it whatsoever. "I'm simply explaining the realities of the situation. Actions have consequences, Richard. Your decision to humiliate my family will have consequences. The question is whether you're prepared to face them." Marcus Chen's voice crackled through the intercom again, interrupting the standoff. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to speak with you privately. We have additional security concerns that require immediate attention." Richard's face hardened further, if that were possible. "We'll continue this conversation later, Harrison. I think it's time for you to leave." "Oh, we'll definitely continue this conversation," Harrison Sterling replied, his tone promising future conflict. "But next time, it might be in a courtroom, or a boardroom, or perhaps in the offices of various regulatory agencies that might be interested in reviewing Blackwood Industries' business practices." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "By the way, Richard, I might want to ask your new daughters about their mother's real reason for never contacting you again. I suspect you'll find the truth quite illuminating." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Elena felt her blood turn to ice as Harrison Sterling walked out, leaving behind a silence that felt pregnant with terrible possibilities. What did he know about their mother that they didn't? What secrets had Carmen taken to her grave that could still reach out to destroy them? Richard was already moving toward his office, his phone pressed to his ear as he demanded updates from his security team. "I want background checks on Harrison Sterling, his business associates, and anyone connected to the Sterling family. I want to know every dirty secret, every vulnerable point, every piece of leverage we can use if this turns into a war." His voice carried the cold calculation of a man who had built an empire by understanding that business was warfare by other means. Sofia grabbed Elena's arm, her grip tight with anxiety. "What do you think he meant about Mama? What could she have done that would make Harrison Sterling know something we don't?" Isabella joined them, her face pale but determined. "Whatever it is, we need to find out before they use it against us. We need to call Tia Rosa, Mama's sister. If anyone knows Carmen's secrets, it would be her." Elena nodded, her mind racing through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Their mother had been a private woman, someone who kept her emotions close to her chest and her past locked away. But what if there were things about Carmen Martinez that even her own daughters didn't know? What if the woman who had raised them with such love and sacrifice had been hiding secrets that could destroy everything they'd just gained? The phone rang, and Richard answered it on the first ring. "Chen, what do you have?" His face grew increasingly grim as he listened to whatever his security chief was reporting. "How many?" "They're all asking the same questions." "Christ, yes. Implement Protocol 7 immediately. And Chen, find out everything you can about Harrison Sterling's business. Relationships. If he wants to play hardball, we need to know where he's vulnerable." Elena watched her father transform from the emotional man who had acknowledged them at his wedding into the cold, calculating businessman who had built a fortune through strategic thinking and ruthless execution. It was both impressive and terrifying to witness, and she wondered if this was what their lives would be like now, constant warfare with people who saw them as threats to be eliminated, rather than human beings deserving of respect. "What's Protocol 7? Isabella asked when Richard hung up the phone. "Complete security lockdown," he replied grimly. "No one gets in or out without verification. All communications monitored. All travel restricted. Ladies, I'm afraid your introduction to my world is about to become a crash course in how the wealthy protect themselves when they're under attack." The intercom crackled again and Marcus Chen's voice carried new urgency. "Mr. Blackwood, we have reporters from 6 major networks at the gates. 3 law firms trying to serve papers and what appears to be private investigators taking photographs from the beach access road. Also, sir, we just intercepted communications suggesting that someone is offering significant money for information about the Martinez sisters' background." Elena felt the walls closing in around them. Less than 24 hours ago, they'd been anonymous young women working low-paying jobs and dreaming of better lives. Now they were targets in a war they didn't understand, facing enemies with resources and connections that could destroy them in ways they'd never imagined. The fairy tale reunion with their father was rapidly becoming a nightmare that threatened to consume them all. "We need to get out of here," Sofia said, her voice tight with anxiety. "This isn't safe. They're going to find things about us, about our lives, about Mama. We're not prepared for this kind of scrutiny." Richard looked at his daughters, really looked at them, and saw the fear in their eyes. These weren't sophisticated socialites accustomed to media attention and legal warfare. They were working-class women who had been thrust into a world where information was currency and privacy was a luxury they could no longer afford. "No," Richard said firmly. "We don't run. We don't hide. We fight back. First, we need to know what we're fighting against. We need to understand what Harrison Sterling thinks he knows about your mother. And we need to be prepared for whatever secrets might surface." He moved to his desk and pulled out a secure phone, dialing a number from memory. "This is Richard Blackwood. I need you to find someone for me. Rosa Martinez, sister of Carmen Martinez, deceased. Last known address, East Los Angeles. I need her. Located and brought here safely within the next 6 hours." As Richard made arrangements to bring their aunt into the protective cocoon of his estate, Elena stared out at the Pacific Ocean and wondered if their mother's dying confession had been a gift or a curse. They'd found their father, but in doing so, they'd also found enemies who would stop at nothing to destroy them. The truth about Carmen Martinez was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. And Elena had the terrible feeling that everything they thought they knew about their mother was about to change forever. The war for the Blackwood fortune had begun, and the battlefield was about to become much more dangerous than any of them had imagined. The armored Mercedes-Benz that delivered Rosa Martinez to the Blackwood estate moved through the crowd of reporters and photographers like a shark cutting through churning water. Elena pressed her face against the bulletproof glass of the living room window, watching as her aunt emerged from the vehicle with the assistance of 2 security guards. Rosa was smaller than Elena remembered, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a simple bun, her weathered hands clutching a black purse that had seen better days. At 58, she looked every year of her age, worn down by decades of cleaning houses and raising 5 children on wages that barely covered rent and groceries. Sofia and Isabella flanked Elena as they watched their aunts approach. All 3, sisters silent with the weight of questions that had been building since Harrison Sterling's ominous parting words. What did he know about their mother that they didn't? What secrets had Carmen taken to her grave that could still reach out to destroy the family she'd tried so hard to protect? Rosa Martinez was the only person left alive who had known Carmen. Before she became a mother, before she became consumed with the singular mission of raising her daughters alone, Richard Blackwood stood behind his daughters, his jaw clenched with the tension of a man preparing for battle. The past 18 hours had been a masterclass in corporate warfare, with his legal team fielding attacks from multiple directions, while his security specialists worked to identify and neutralize threats to his family's safety. The Blackwood industry stock had stabilized somewhat, but the board was growing increasingly nervous about the personal scandal affecting their CEO's ability to lead the company through what was shaping up to be the crisis of his career. Rosa entered the foyer with the uncertain steps of someone who had never walked on marble floors or seen crystal chandeliers that cost more than her annual income. Her dark eyes, so similar to Carmen's that Elena felt her breath catch swept over the opulent surroundings, with a mixture of awe and suspicion. She was dressed in her best black dress, the one she wore to church on Sundays and special occasions. But even her finest clothes looked shabby against the backdrop of Richard's wealth. "Mijos," Rosa said softly, opening her arms to embrace her nieces. The Spanish endearment carried the weight of shared grief and familiar love, a reminder of the world they'd left behind in their journey to claim their birthright. Elena felt. Tears prick her eyes as she hugged her aunt, inhaling the familiar scent of vanilla and soap that had been a constant in their childhood when Rosa had helped Carmen raise 3 energetic girls in a cramped apartment. "Tia Rosa," Elena whispered, "we're so glad you're here. We need to ask you about Mama, about things that happened before we were born. It's important." Rosa pulled back, studying her niece's faces with the shrewd intelligence that had helped her survive 40 years of poverty and struggle. "I figured this day would come eventually," she said quietly. "Your mother, she had secrets that were eating her alive. I told her she should tell you girls the truth, but she was so afraid of what you might think of her." Richard stepped forward, extending his hand in greeting. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Richard Blackwood. I'd want to thank you for coming, and I want you to know that your nieces are incredible young women. Carmen clearly did an amazing job raising them." Rosa studied Richard's face intently, her expression unreadable. "You look just like them," she said finally. "Same eyes, same stubborn chin." Carmen used to say that was her curse. She could never look at her girls without seeing the man who broke her heart. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. "I never meant to break her heart," he said quietly. "I didn't even know she was pregnant. If I had known... Rosa's laugh was bitter, carrying decades of suppressed anger. "Shh. Oh, but you did know, Mr. Blackwood. That's the secret your mama took to her grave. You knew about the babies, and you chose to pretend they didn't exist." Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "What do you mean, Tia?" "Mama said she tried to tell him, but his secretary wouldn't let her see him. She said he was too busy with important people to waste time on him." Maid Rosa shook her head slowly, her weathered face creased with old pain. "That's the story she told you because she was too proud to tell you the truth, too ashamed to admit what really happened." Isabella stepped forward, her voice sharp with growing dread. "What truth? What really happened?" Rosa looked at Richard, then at her nieces, seeming to weigh the cost of revelation against the cost of continued silence. "Your mama didn't just work as a housekeeper at the Ritz-Carlton. She was also working as an escort for wealthy men who wanted companionship. High-class, expensive companionship." The silence that followed was deafening. Lena felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach, all the air driven from her lungs by the implications of what her aunt had just revealed. Their mother, the woman who had raised them with such moral certainty, who had worked 3 jobs to keep them fed and clothed, who had sacrificed everything for their welfare, had been selling her body to rich men for money. "No," Sofia whispered, her voice breaking. "That's not possible. Mama was. She was good. She was moral. She went to church every Sunday. She would never." Rosa's expression softened with sympathy for her niece's shock. "Mia, your mama, was 19 years old, alone in a strange city, with no family and no money. She was beautiful, and she was desperate. When men at the hotel offered her more money in one night than she could make in a month cleaning rooms, she made the choice she thought she had to make to survive." Richard's face had gone pale, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "She wasn't just a housekeeper when we met. She was..." Couldn't finish the sentence, but Rosa nodded grimly. "She was working for an escort service that catered to wealthy hotel guests. That's how she met you, Mr. Blackwood. You hired her for 3 nights while you were in Los Angeles for business meetings?" Elena felt bile rise in her throat. The romantic story their mother had told them about falling in love with a charming businessman had been a lie built on a foundation of prostitution and transaction. "But she said you had an affair that lasted 3 months," she said weakly. "She said you cared about each other." Rosa's smile was sad but not unkind. She did see him again after those first 3 nights. "But it wasn't romance, Mia. It was business. Your mama fell in love with a client who was paying for her time. I stopped using the service after the first week," Richard said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I kept seeing Carmen because I cared about her, not because I was paying for her company. I gave her money because I knew she needed it. But I thought I was helping someone I cared about, not continuing a business arrangement." His words carried the weight of a man trying to reconcile his memories with a truth that recast everything. He thought he knew about his past. Isabella's voice was barely above a whisper. "So when she got pregnant, she couldn't tell you because she was afraid you'd think she was trying to trap you with a prostitute's baby." Rosa nodded, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. She was terrified, Mia. Terrified that you'd reject her. Terrified that you'd think she was trying to extort money from you. Terrified that you'd expose her secret and destroy any chance she had of building a respectable life for her children. But she did try to contact me, Richard said desperately. She came to my office. She waited 6 hours. Rosa's expression hardened. Yes, she did try. And when she finally got to see you, when she told you she was pregnant with your babies, do you remember what you said to her? Richard's face went white as memory crashed over him like a tsunami. Oh God, he whispered. I remember. I asked her if she was sure the babies were mine. I asked her how many other clients she'd been with during the time we were together. The confession hung in the air like a death sentence. Elena felt her heart break for the mother she'd thought she knew, the woman who had swallowed her pride, and faced humiliation to try to give her unborn children a father. What did she say? Elena asked, though she dreaded the answer. She said she understood why you'd asked that question, Rosa replied quietly. She said she'd get a paternity test done after the babies were born, and if they were yours, she'd contact you again, but she never did. Why not? Sofia asked, her voice small and broken. Why didn't she contact him when she got proof we were his children? Rosa wiped her eyes with a tissue that had seen better days. Because 3 days after you girls were born, she got a visit from a man in an expensive suit. He said he represented Mr. Blackwood's interests. He said his client was aware of the situation and was prepared to offer a settlement in exchange for Carmen's agreement to never contact Richard again and never reveal the identity of the baby's father. Richard's face had gone from pale to gray. I never sent anyone to see her. I never authorized any settlement. I didn't even know the babies had been born. Rosa's laugh was bitter. The man had photographs of Carmen from her escort days, had documentation of her work with the service. He told her that if she ever tried to contact you or claim you as the father of her children, he would make sure those photographs were distributed to every newspaper in the country. He said you were a rising businessman who couldn't afford to be associated with a whore and her bastard children. Elena felt rage building in her chest, hot and pure and dangerous. She took the money, she asked, her voice barely controlled. She took $50,000, Rosa confirmed. Not enough to disappear, to move to a different city, to start over. With a new identity. She used the money to move to East Los Angeles, to buy the bakery building. To create a new life where she could raise her daughters without anyone knowing about her past. But who was the man? Isabella demanded. Who sent him if Richard didn't? Rosa looked directly at Richard, her eyes hard with accusation. She said he introduced himself as a representative of Sterling Enterprises. He said his client had business relationships with you that could be damaged if a scandal emerged involving escort services and illegitimate children. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Harrison Sterling had known about Carmen's past, had known about the triplets' existence, had actively worked to keep them separated from their father for 24 years. But why? What did he gain by keeping Richard's daughters hidden? Richard was already moving toward his phone, his face a mask of cold fury. Marcus, I need everything you can find on Harrison. Sterling's business dealings from 1999 to 2001. Focus on any contracts or partnerships with Blackwood Industries. Any investments? Any joint ventures? I need to know what he stood to gain from. Keeping me isolated? He hung up and turned to face his daughters and Rosa. I'm going to destroy him, he said quietly. I'm going to find out what he did and why he did it. And then I'm going to make him pay for 24 years of stolen time. Elena felt a chill run down her spine as she watched her father transform from grieving man to calculating predator. The revelation about their mother's past had hurt, but the knowledge that Harrison Sterling had actively worked to keep them apart had awakened something dangerous in Richard Blackwood. The war that had begun at the wedding was about to escalate. To a level that would leave bodies in its wake, Rosa reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope that looked familiar. Your mama kept everything, she said quietly. The photographs the man showed her, the documents he had about her. Past the contract she signed agreeing to stay away from you and never reveal the truth. She wanted you girls to have proof of what really happened in case you ever needed it. Elena took the envelope with trembling hands, knowing that whatever was inside would change everything they thought they knew about their family's history. The truth about Carmen Martinez was more complex and painful than they'd ever imagined, but it was also the key to understanding why their lives had been shaped by forces beyond their control. "There's something else," Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something your mama discovered just before she died. Something about why Harrison Sterling was so determined to keep you away from your father." She pulled out a second envelope, smaller and sealed with wax. "She made me promise to give this to you only if you found Richard and he acknowledged you as his daughters. She said it was insurance in case the Sterling family ever tried to hurt you." Elena broke the wax seal. With shaking fingers, unfolding a single sheet of paper covered in her mother's familiar handwriting, as she read, her face went white, then red with fury. "What is it?" Sofia asked urgently. Elena looked up at her sisters, her father and her aunt, her voice deadly quiet when she spoke. "Harrison Sterling didn't just want to keep us away from our father. He wanted to make sure we never existed at all, according to this. He offered Mama an additional $100,000 if she would give us up for adoption and disappear completely." The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Harrison Sterling hadn't just separated a family, he had tried to erase them entirely. But the question remained, why? What did he stand to gain from ensuring that Richard Blackwood never knew he had children? The answer to that question would determine whether the Blackwood family survived the war that was coming, or whether Harrison Sterling's 24-year campaign to destroy them would finally succeed. The Blackwood Industries boardroom on the 42nd floor of the downtown Los Angeles tower felt like a war room as Richard Blackwood faced the most dangerous challenge of his career. 17 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces masks of barely concealed concern as they processed the information that Marcus Chen had compiled over the past 72 hours. The revelation about Harrison Sterling's involvement in separating Richard from his daughters had exposed a conspiracy that reached far deeper than anyone had imagined, touching the very foundations of the company Richard had built from nothing. Elena, Sofia, and Isabella sat in chairs along the wall, no longer the unknown daughters crashing a wedding, but key players in a corporate drama that would determine the future of a $4 billion empire. Elena wore a navy Armani suit that had been tailored overnight, her first designer clothing, and her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun that made her look like the MBA graduate she'd never had the chance to become. Sofia had traded her wire-rimmed glasses for designer frames that complemented her newfound confidence, while Isabella's emerald eyes blazed with the fire of someone who had survived poverty and wasn't about to be intimidated by corporate warfare. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had commanded boardrooms for over 2 decades. "What I'm about to tell you will explain everything that's happened over the past week, and it will determine how we respond to what's coming next." He activated the wall-mounted display screen, showing a timeline that stretched back 25 years. "In 1999, Harrison Sterling learned about my relationship with Carmen Martinez and my impending fatherhood. Rather than allow nature to take its course, he actively intervened to separate me from my children." Board member Catherine Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had been with the company since its early days, leaned forward. "Richard, we're sympathetic to your personal situation, but how does this affect Blackwood Industries? Our shareholders are demanding answers about the stock volatility, and several major clients are questioning whether you can provide stable leadership while dealing with family drama." Marcus Chen stepped forward, his expression grim, because it wasn't just about separating Richard from his daughters. Sterling was positioning himself for a hostile takeover that he's been planning for over 2 decades. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. In 2000, Sterling Enterprises acquired significant stakes in 3 of our major competitors. In 2001, he purchased shares in Blackwood Industries through a series of shell companies that we've only now been able to identify. He's been buying our stock for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to strike. Elena felt her blood turn to ice as she processed the information. Harrison Sterling hadn't just destroyed her family, he'd been using their separation as part of a long-term strategy to destroy her father's company. "How much does he control?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the fear growing in her chest. 18% through direct ownership, Marcus replied. Another 12% through allied investors and shell companies, If he can convince enough shareholders that Richard is unfit to lead because of personal scandal, he could force a vote of no confidence. The boardroom erupted in concerned murmurs as the directors realized they were facing an existential threat to the company's independence. Sterling's strategy was diabolical in its patience and precision. He had spent decades positioning himself to exploit any weakness in Richard's personal life. And the wedding scandal had provided the perfect opportunity to strike. "There's more," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the weight of additional bad news. "Sterling has been feeding information to the press about the Martinez family's background. Stories are breaking about Carmen's past as an escort, about the sisters' financial struggles, about alleged inconsistencies in their DNA evidence. He's trying to paint them as opportunistic criminals who are exploiting Richard's emotions for financial gain." Sofia's hands clenched into fists. "He's destroying Mama's memory to serve his own purposes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "She's been dead for 2 weeks, and he's dragging her name through the mud to justify his vendetta against our father." Isabella nodded, her green eyes hard as emeralds. "We need to fight back. We need to expose what he did, how he separated our family, how he's been manipulating the market for decades." Board member Jonathan Hayes, a veteran of corporate warfare, spoke up from the far end of the table. "Even if we can prove Sterling's involvement in your personal situation, it doesn't necessarily protect us from a hostile takeover if he can. Convince enough shareholders that the scandal makes you unfit to lead. The board might have no choice but to remove you as CEO to protect shareholder value." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Richard had built Blackwood Industries from a garage startup to a global technology conglomerate. But corporate governance was a harsh mistress that could remove even the most successful leaders if they became liability to shareholder returns. The board members around the table weren't just colleagues, they were fiduciaries with legal obligations to protect the company's interests above personal loyalty. "That's exactly what he's counting on," Elena said, rising from her chair with the confidence of someone who had inherited her father's strategic mind. "He knows that scandal can destroy a leader faster than poor performance. He's been patient for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to exploit Richard's personal life. But he made one mistake: he underestimated us." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Elena. She moved to stand beside her father, her presence transforming the dynamic in ways that surprised everyone present. "Harrison Sterling separated us from our father because he knew that Richard's greatest strength wasn't his business acumen, was his ability to inspire loyalty and build lasting relationships. He was afraid that having children would make Richard more powerful, not less." Catherine Walsh studied Elena intently. "What are you proposing?" she asked. "That we turn this into a family business story? That we present Richard's newfound daughters as an asset rather than a liability?" Elena shook her head. "I'm proposing that we go to war, that we expose Sterling's decades-long conspiracy, that we show the world exactly what kind of man he is, that we use his own tactics against him." Richard watched his daughter with growing admiration. In just a few days, Elena had transformed from an unknown woman seeking acknowledgement to a strategic thinker who understood corporate warfare at an instinctive level. "What did you have in mind?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew he was going to support whatever plan she proposed. "Sterling's power comes from his reputation as old money aristocracy," Elena explained, beginning to pace as her mind worked through the possibilities. "He's built his empire on the perception that he's honorable, ethical, above the kind of dirty tricks that new money entrepreneurs use. But we have evidence that he's been manipulating markets, destroying families, and conducting illegal corporate espionage for decades. Destroy his reputation, and we destroy his power base." Marcus Chen nodded slowly. "The evidence is compelling. Sterling's interference with the Martinez family was just the beginning. We found documentation suggesting he's used similar tactics against other business rivals. Industrial espionage, character assassination, market manipulation, all conducted through a network of shell companies and intermediaries that insulate him from direct responsibility. But exposing him won't necessarily save Richard's position," Jonathan Hayes pointed out. "Even if we prove Sterling is a villain, the board still has a fiduciary duty to shareholders. If the scandal continues to damage stock price and company reputation, We may have no choice but to act. The sun dipped below the Malibu horizon as Richard Blackwood stood in his private study. The room dimly lit by a wall of touchscreen monitors and the soft glow of a half-finished scotch. His mind raced with the revelations Rosa Martinez had just laid bare: Carmen's hidden past, the hush money, and most damning of all, the betrayal orchestrated by Harrison Sterling. Rage simmered beneath his tailored exterior, but it was now joined by something far more dangerous: purpose. The girls had retreated to their guest. Suites, upstairs bedrooms larger than the entire apartment they once shared above the bakery. Elena sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the photo of their mother and Richard in the Ritz-Carlton. "We've been living a lie," she whispered. Sofia sat by the window, scrolling through articles on her tablet, all speculating on the Blackwood daughter's bombshell. Isabella, pacing the floor, was already mapping out next steps. "He kept us from our father," Isabella said. "Sterling, he blackmailed Mama into disappearing." Sofia looked up. "If this gets out, Tiff, people know what Sterling did. Won't just ruin him, it'll fracture half the business community in California." Elena met her sister's gaze. "Then maybe it's time." Downstairs, Richard's call with his PR team was ending. "We go on the offensive," he said firmly. "Control the narrative. I want an interview with a reputable journalist. No tabloids, no speculation. We lay out the facts: DNA proof, Carmen's integrity, the Sterling interference. I want every piece of evidence verified and ready." He ended the call and poured himself another drink, staring at the fire flickering beneath a marble mantel. He'd survived boardroom betrayals, federal probes, and an antitrust case that almost bankrupted him. But this was different. This was personal. The following morning, Elena, Sofia, and Isabella joined Richard in the estate's media room, where a crisis strategy team had assembled. Screens displayed data charts, headlines, and risk assessments. At the head of the table was Lillian Kwan, Richard's legendary crisis manager. "You're trending in 38 countries," she said without preamble. "Half sympathetic daughters, half alleged gold diggers. We can work with that." Elena leaned forward. "We want the truth out. But we're not looking to burn everything down, just the lies." Lillian smiled. "Good. Because the truth is the best tool we have, when used correctly." Richard added, "The moment we expose Harrison Sterling, the war begins. He's too powerful to go down without taking others with him." Sofia spoke up. "Then we fight smart. We go public before he spins his version." The next 48 hours moved with hurricane force. The DNA testing lab issued a formal statement verifying paternity. Carmen's birth certificates were authenticated. The twins recorded a joint interview with an award-winning journalist from the New York Times. No tears, no theatrics, just the facts. Delivered with the quiet force of women who had waited too long to be heard. On the day the interview aired, Richard stood beside his daughters on the manicured lawn as drones hovered overhead and news vans lined the road. In the video, Elena looked directly into the camera. "Our mother, Carmen Martinez, was silenced 25 years ago by powerful men who feared what her truth would mean. We are not here for money. We are here because no one, no woman, no child deserves to be erased." The backlash against Sterling was immediate. Hashtags like hashtag Sterling suppression and hashtag Blackwood daughters trended within hours. Public figures, women's rights groups, and journalists began scrutinizing Harrison's business practices. Whispers of intimidation, bribery, and more hidden secrets grew louder. By week's end, 2 congressional aides anonymously leaked emails suggesting that Sterling had used influence to block regulatory probes into several real estate deals, where Carmen's silence might have been leveraged as collateral. In the Blackwood boardroom, Lillian briefed the family. "He's bleeding. If we keep the pressure up, he'll make a mistake. It's when we strike." Richard turned to his daughters. "You need to make a choice. Keep going or step back. The board is skittish. They're pushing for me to step down, temporarily or permanently." "You can't," Isabella said. "That's what he wants." Sofia nodded. "We stay in control. We stay together." The final straw came when Victoria Sterling broke her silence. In an exclusive with a rival network, she revealed she'd learned of her father's actions 2 years prior, but had kept quiet, believing it was a private family matter. "I regret that decision," Victoria said, eyes glistening. "Now believe Carmen Martinez was wronged. I believe her daughters deserve to be recognized. I believe my father's actions were driven by fear, not justice." It was the blow that turned the tide. Within days, multiple Sterling family investors pulled out. A congressional hearing was announced. Richard filed a formal lawsuit alleging defamation, interference with parental rights, malicious concealment of legal heirs. As the cameras turned toward Washington and stock tickers adjusted to the chaos, Elena found herself on the phone with an unlikely source, Victoria. "I never hated you," Victoria said, "but I hated the timing, the spectacle. My life collapsed because of one moment, but I now see the truth," Elena replied quietly. "None of us asked for this. But we're finally where we belong." The sisters sat on the Malibu balcony. That evening, looking out over the Pacific, Isabella raised her glass. "To truth," Sofia added, "to family." And Elena, holding the photo of their mother, whispered to Carmen. The war was not over, but the truth had found its voice and it refused to be silenced again. A week after the New York Times interview, the Blackwood estate became a fortress. Armed guards patrolled the perimeters, and drone interference signals scrambled paparazzi attempts to capture overhead shots. But despite the walls of security, Elena, Sofia, and Isabella had never felt more exposed. The public now knew their names. Their faces were on morning talk shows and social media timelines. Every detail of their upbringing, from the bakery apartment to Sofia's part-time job at the nursing home, had been excavated for content. They were being hailed as brave truth-tellers and also accused of being calculating opportunists. The contrast was dizzying. "You can't open your mouth without someone interpreting it," Sofia whispered, eyes fixed on her phone, where a viral thread was analyzing her choice of outfit from the interview. "Apparently I weaponized humility, whatever that means." Isabella laughed bitterly. "You wore your nicest dress. That was the crime." Richard, meanwhile, was facing a different battlefield, the boardroom. Blackwood Industries, worth over $32 billion, was entering what some financial journalists called a cultural reckoning. Investors were divided. Some were publicly supporting Richard, citing transparency and integrity. Others whispered that the family drama made the company unstable. Stock price fluctuations reflected every new headline. At the heart of it all was a looming vote. Should Richard Blackwood remain CEO? Richard sat in the executive boardroom, surrounded by 12 men and women who had helped him build his empire. At the head of the table was chairwoman Lorraine Bishop, a woman in her late 60s with white blonde hair and the ruthless calm of someone who had survived 3 corporate hostile takeovers. "We're not questioning your integrity," she began. "We're questioning distraction. Your personal situation has cost us over $700 million in lost value this month." "I understand," Richard said, calm but firm. "But may I remind you, every cent of that value was built on the same leadership you're now debating. I didn't lose control. I reclaimed a part of my life that was stolen from me." "Your daughters have no formal stake in the company," CFO Jonathan Lynn said.
Oh.
"Their presence complicates legacy conversations." "Then maybe it's time they had a stake," Richard replied. "Blackwood Industries is a family company again. Let's treat it like one." The room erupted into whispers. Later that night, Richard summoned his daughters to his study. The mood was somber, but determined. "The board is split," he told them, "and I'm preparing for a vote of confidence within the week." "Are they trying to push you out?" Isabella asked. "They might. But I won't go quietly," Richard said. He placed 3 envelopes on the desk. Inside were official documents, naming Elena, Sofia, Isabella as co-beneficiaries of the Blackwood family trust, along with preliminary offers to bring them into the company as board apprentices. Elena was the first to speak. "We don't have MBAs or law degrees. You have something better," Richard said. "Instinct, integrity, grit. You've navigated more in the past month than most junior executives do in a decade." Sofia opened her envelope slowly. Her eyes widened. Is this real? A 4% share each? Richard nodded. You're my daughters. You're not just here to watch. You're here to help lead. The next day, the sisters attended their first board strategy meeting. The room was a cathedral of wealth mahogany panels, touchscreen tables, hand-blown glass pendant lights, but the tension was thicker than the air in a bank vault. Lorraine Bishop welcomed them with a tight smile. Ladies, welcome to the table. We've scheduled a corporate vote of confidence. 2 days from now, you may observe, but voting remains internal unless you formally activate your shares, in which case your votes will count. They will, Elena said, voice steady, effective immediately. The tension spiked. A senior partner coughed. Someone scribbled something furiously in a leather planner. Very well, Lorraine said coolly. After the meeting in the hallway, Sofia leaned in. They didn't see that coming. They will now, Isabella said. It just became a threat. That night, Elena paced the balcony as ocean wind whipped at her hair. She knew what the headlines would say if they voted against a motion. To remove their father, triplets protect billionaire father, cement power in scandal-ridden empire. But this wasn't about optics. It was about right and wrong, about keeping promises. She texted Sofia and Isabella. We vote for Dad. Always. The day of the vote, media vans crowded the Blackwood Industries headquarters downtown. Protesters stood outside with signs, hashtag Justice for Carmen, hashtag Sterling must fall, and hashtag Blackwood Sisters 20-5. Inside, the boardroom pulsed with nervous anticipation. Lorraine called the meeting to order. Today's motion, removal of Richard Blackwood as acting CEO, pending personal stabilization. The board voted one by one. 6 votes for removal. 5 against. It came down to the daughters. Elena stood. My name is Elena Martinez Blackwood. I vote to keep my father in charge. Sofia rose next. Sofia Martinez Blackwood. I vote against removal. Isabella rose last. Isabella Martinez Blackwood. I vote against removal. I also propose a motion to restructure the Blackwood Foundation for Female Entrepreneurship in honor of Carmen Martinez. The room burst into stunned silence. Then applause. Richard didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes, misted with emotion, met his daughter's. The vote passed. He remained CEO, but something even more powerful had shifted. The Blackwood daughters weren't just heirs. They were now power players. After the meeting, as the triplets returned to the estate, Isabella flopped onto the couch. We're in it now. We've always been in it, Elena said. Sofia checked her phone. You guys need to see this. A leaked email thread between Harrison Sterling and an anonymous fixer was circulating online. In it, Sterling detailed the entire scheme to silence Carmen Martinez. The language was brutal discussions of disposing of liabilities and ensuring the girl disappears quietly. The media exploded. Richard called an emergency press conference. I stand here not as a billionaire, he said, flanked by his daughters, but as a father. Today I'm announcing a lawsuit against Harrison Sterling for conspiracy, defamation, and obstruction of familial rights. We will not be bullied. We will not be erased. We will not be silenced. Cameras flashed like lightning. Back in the limo, Elena squeezed Sofia's hand. You okay? Sofia nodded. It's not over. But it's finally beginning. Elena looked at their reflection in the tinted glass. 3 women who had gone from overlooked to undeniable. They were no longer just the triplets from East LA. They were Blackwoods, and the world knew it. At precisely 7:31 a.m., 3 federal subpoenas were delivered to Sterling Enterprises' West Coast headquarters. By 9 a.m., financial journalists were live blogging what they dubbed the beginning of the end. And by noon, Harrison Sterling's face, once synonymous with power and legacy, was plastered across every major network under the Chiron. Real estate tycoon under investigation, Blackwood family responds. At the Blackwood estate, Elena, Sofia, and Isabella watched the unfolding chaos from the living room, their expressions a mix of grim satisfaction and nervous anticipation. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was validation. Isabella scrolled. Through her phone, Sterling's PR rep just resigned. 3 board members too, Sofia added, reading from her tablet. 2 more have filed motions to protect personal assets in case of dissolution. Elena leaned back, her face unreadable. It's unraveling. But even as Sterling Enterprises began to hemorrhage credibility, Richard remained measured. He was in his office reviewing documents with his legal team. A high-level SEC investigation had been opened based on the leaked email threads. And while the Blackwood family was cooperating fully, they were also preparing for retaliation, because Harrison Sterling wasn't the kind of man to go down quietly that afternoon. A courier arrived, bearing a letter in crisp white stationery no-return address. Richard opened it at his desk while the girls stood nearby. The message was short, handwritten in a spidery scrawl. You think you've won, but you've only unearthed the beginning. Carmen wasn't who you believed. The past will always catch up. Elena's stomach dropped. He's bluffing, or he's planning something worse, Sofia said. Isabella folded her arms. What else could he have on Mama? Richard's voice was low. It doesn't matter, we've done nothing wrong. Carmen did nothing wrong. Let him dig. All he'll find is how far he's about to fall. But behind his confident tone, Richard ordered Marcus Chen to double security on the girls and himself. The next blow came later that evening. A blogger, once paid off by Sterling's network, published a salacious article claiming that Carmen Martinez had once been involved in an international money laundering ring. The article was thinly sourced, full of hearsay, and already being challenged by several legal firms. But the damage had begun. She's calling her a criminal, Sofia said, voice shaking as she read the post aloud. They're saying she used the bakery to wash money for Mexican cartels. Elena grabbed the laptop and slammed it shut. It's a hit job. You need to respond, Isabella said. Fast, clean, decisive. Richard agreed. Lillian is already preparing a statement, but this isn't about the blog. It's about public opinion. Sterling knows he can't win in court, so he's trying to dirty the air. Within hours, the Blackwood Foundation's communications team released a powerful statement. Carmen Martinez was a single mother who raised 3 daughters with grace and sacrifice. These claims are baseless, offensive, and an insult to every. A woman who's worked to survive in a system built to silence her. The Blackwood family stands united, unshaken. The post went viral. Prominent feminist groups rallied behind the sisters. Major publications discredited the blog, citing lack of evidence. But the damage Sterling intended was psychological, making them question who their mother really was. And for Elena, the doubt was festering. That night, she sat alone in the garden, staring out at the darkened Pacific. Richard found her there. She was a fighter, he said softly. Carmen, she survived things I can't imagine, and I'm ashamed I ever doubted her. Elena looked up, eyes brimming. What if there's more? What if he's right? What if she wasn't just trying to protect us? What if she was running from something bigger? Richard sat beside her. Then she's still the bravest person I've ever known. A silence settled between them, thick with shared grief and defiance. Across town, the DA's office issued a subpoena for Harrison Sterling's private communications. Evidence was mounting, more payoffs, threats, and attempts to suppress testimony. Whistleblowers were lining up. And then, the final crack. Victoria Sterling returned to the spotlight in an exclusive primetime interview. Victoria sat before the camera's eyes, tired but resolute. My father has spent his life controlling people. When I learned about Carmen and the triplets, I stayed quiet because I was afraid of him. I regret that. But I'm not afraid anymore. He's lied, he's bullied. I support the Blackwood family in their search for justice. The words stunned the public. Sterling Enterprises stock plunged another 12% overnight. The next morning, Harrison Sterling was served with a formal federal indictment at the estate. The girls were in the kitchen with Richard when the news broke. Isabella dropped her coffee mug in shock. Sofia burst into relieved laughter. Elena just stared at the screen in silence. Read it again, she said. Richard obliged. Charges include witness tampering, fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. A heavy exhale escaped her lips. Then it's over. Richard looked at his daughters. No, it's beginning. He turned toward the window, watching the sun rise over the ocean. The name Blackwood means something again, but this time, it's because of all of you. Isabella smiled. We fought for her dad. and she'd be proud. Sofia added. Elena stepped forward and placed the photograph of Carmen back on the mantel. Let the world see her. The real her. The mother, who gave us everything. The war was over, but the legacy had only just begun. Weeks after Harrison Sterling's indictment, the frenzy began to slow. The aftershocks were still shaping the world around the Blackwoods. Sterling Enterprises was on the verge of collapse, several executives facing charges, and Harrison himself confined to house arrest in his Pasadena mansion. The power he once wielded had disintegrated into headlines, subpoenas, tarnished lineage. But at the Blackwood estate, a new chapter was quietly being written. I've arranged meetings with the full foundation team, Richard announced. One morning over breakfast, it's time you see what you're inheriting. Not just in money, but in mission. The triplets sat around the long walnut dining table, a rare moment of peace among the flurry of interviews, legal consultations, and investment discussions. They looked different, now not just better dressed, but more self-assured, battle-hardened. Is this about the scholarship program? Sofia asked. That's part of it, Richard replied. But the real work begins with reimagining Blackwood Industries. I want it to reflect who we are now, not just who I was when I built it. Elena's brow lifted. You're serious? I've never been more serious, he said. You girls didn't just reclaim your identity, you forced this entire empire to confront its soul. That deserves permanence. So it began a week-long tour through Richard's legacy. The sisters walked through bustling Blackwood R&D facilities, watched prototypes of medical diagnostic tools being tested in sleek labs, and visited Blackwood Studios, where film and documentary projects were in development. The triplets were met with a mix of awe and curiosity from employees. Are they really his daughters? Whispered one intern in a hallway. They don't look like they belong here, another said. But Isabella turned and smiled. We get that a lot. We didn't used to think so either. Was it Blackwood Capital Richard's investment division that a seed of something deeper was planted? We review over 2,000 pitches a year, explained Veronica Wu, the division's managing director. But only 2% are from minority women founders. That statistic hit hard. That's going to change, Lena said without hesitation. By the end of the week, the triplets proposed a $50 million initiative within Blackwood Capital, Carmen Fund, dedicated to funding businesses led by women of color, especially first-generation founders. Richard approved it immediately, but not everyone welcomed their involvement. At a private executive reception, several longtime shareholders voiced their concerns in hushed tones. They're politicizing the brand. Emotion over performance? Dangerous. Richard's letting sentimentality interfere with strategy. It was Elena who overheard the final barb. This is what happens when you let poor girls play princess. Her response was swift. During her scheduled remarks at the event, she stepped up to the podium and, without notes, delivered a thunderbolt. Some of you believe we don't belong here because we didn't grow up in wealth. But we belong because we understand value, not just of money, but of resilience. Carmen Martinez cleaned floors so I could stand here. If that bothers you, you're not defending legacy. You're protecting exclusion, and exclusion has no place. In the future of this company, the room fell dead silent. Richard raised his glass. Later that night, as the family returned home, Sofia sat on the terrace, her laptop open and glowing. You okay? Isabella asked, stepping out with 2 mugs of tea. Sofia nodded. I was just thinking, Mama would have loved this view. Not because it's fancy, it's because it's peaceful. Isabella sat down beside her. You think we'll ever really belong here? Sofia hesitated. Maybe we're not supposed to belong. Maybe we're supposed to change it. Inside, Elena was reviewing notes for a meeting when Richard knocked on her door. Got a minute? Always. He stepped in, holding a leather-bound book. I had this made for you all. It's Carmen's story the way it should be remembered. The book's cover read, Carmen, A Life of Fire and Grace. Inside were old photos, copies of her letters, and a foreword written by Richard himself. I want to publish it, he said. Let the world see her humanity, not the smear stories, The truth. Elena was speechless. She turned a page and saw a photo of Carmen at 20, standing in front of the old bakery, with flour on her cheek and laughter in her eyes. "She looks happy here," Elena whispered. "She was," Richard said, "until the world told her she didn't matter. You proved otherwise." The next few days were a blur of forward momentum. The Carmen Fund launched publicly to wide acclaim. Applications poured in. Richard took the sisters to their first shareholder. Meeting as full co-trustees of the Blackwood Trust, photos from the event ran with headlines like "Triplets of Truth, the Sisters Redefining a Billion-Dollar Dynasty." But amid the triumph, a personal question loomed. Elena raised it during a late-night strategy meeting at the estate. "Dad," she asked, "what about your will?" Richard chuckled. "That's not exactly cocktail conversation. I'm serious," she said. "Something happens to you. What happens to all of this?" He paused. "It goes to you. All of you." Sofia and Isabella exchanged glances. "We don't want it all," Isabella said softly. "We just want to know you trust us to carry it." "I do," Richard said. "That's why I'm revising. Everything. You'll be co-executors. And eventually, when I step down as CEO, I want one of you to take over." They were stunned. "But we're not ready," Sofia said. "You weren't ready to crash a wedding either." Richard smiled. "But you did it. You told the truth. You stood tall. That's leadership." The following weekend, the family visited Carmen's grave. It was a modest headstone in East LA, freshly polished and surrounded by blooming marigolds. Richard knelt and placed a bouquet of lilies. "I failed you once," he said. "I never will again." The sisters stood hand in hand. "We brought her home," Elena whispered. "We brought her story back." Isabella pulled a small gold chain from her pocket. Carmen's cross, once hidden in the false bottom of her jewelry box, and draped it gently over the headstone. For her, for everything. As they turned to leave, a breeze swept across the cemetery, rustling the trees like whispers of the past. Sofia smiled. "She knows." They walked away from the grave, three daughters, no longer defined by the absence of a father, but by the presence of a legacy they were building together, and the world, finally, was watching them on their terms. 1 year later, the Blackwood estate was no longer just a monument to wealth, it had become a home. The once silent halls now echoed with laughter, debate, and the steady rhythm of a family that had finally found itself. Elena stood in the center of the estate's newest addition, a multimedia storytelling lab named the Carmen Center, surrounded by interns and creative producers. A documentary was in post-production, chronicling not just their personal story but the untold narratives of women like Carmen, immigrants, workers, survivors. Elena, now the creative director of Blackwood Studios' new division, looked over an early cut of the documentary titled "Unseen: The Mothers Who Build Empires" as the screen darkened on Carmen's smile. Elena spoke softly into the room. "Make sure the last shot holds. That smile. It's everything." Meanwhile, across town, Sofia walked briskly through the bustling pediatric wing of St. Lucia Medical Center. She was completing her clinical residency, her scrubs tucked beneath a fitted blazer, embroidered with the hospital's insignia and the small silver CM, pin she always wore near her heart. She greeted a group of nurses with warmth and calm, the kind of leadership honed not just in classrooms, but in a life that had taught her to listen and endure. Everyone respected her not because she was a Blackwood, but because she showed up with compassion and strength every single day, down the coast. Isabella leaned over a stainless steel counter, testing the final sauce for a private gala dinner. Comida Clara, her catering company named after their mother's birth name, had grown from a local curiosity to one of the most in-demand culinary ventures in Southern California. Her food wasn't just delicious, it told stories of heritage, of struggle, joy. Tonight's menu was Carmen's legacy, Era's con palo, tamarind-glazed ribs, and tres leches with cinnamon-dusted foam. The guests would rave, but Isabella cooked for one person always, back at the estate. Richard Blackwood stood on the main balcony, the Pacific Ocean glinting gold in the evening light. His silver hair blew softly in the breeze as he watched. 3 black sedans arrive at the gate, carrying guests for the anniversary gala. Celebration of 1 year since the public revelation that had altered all their lives. He wore a tailored navy suit. But there was something different in his demeanor, less armored. He was no longer a man merely managing empires. He was a father, finally grounded in the truth. The gala held on the estate's west lawn was both elegant and intimate. The guest list included journalists, artists, activists, board members, most importantly, families impacted by the new initiatives launched in Carmen's name. Hundreds had gathered not just to honor the Blackwoods, but to remember Carmen Martinez, the woman whose voice had been silenced, whose daughters had raised it again with fire. As dusk settled, Elena took the stage. The crowd quieted. Exactly 1 year ago, she began, my sisters and I stood in this house as strangers. Poor girls from East LA, armed with a DNA test and a promise made at our mother's deathbed. We didn't know if we'd be rejected. We didn't know if the truth would ruin lives. But we did know we weren't going to stay invisible any longer. She paused, scanning the crowd. Richard stood in the front row, pride glistening in his eyes. Sofia and Isabella stood nearby. Radiant. Our mother wasn't perfect, Elena continued. She made mistakes. She hid truths. But she did it all to protect us. And she taught us that your past doesn't define your worth. Your love does. Your courage does. Applause rippled through the crowd. And today her name lives in a medical scholarship program for first-generation students. In a fund that has now launched over 60 minority women-led startups. In a food company built from recipes she passed down between double shifts. Another round of applause. Elena smiled. So when people ask who we are, I tell them, we're Carmen's girls. We just happen to have Blackwood bank accounts now. The laughter was warm. Elena closed her notes. She never got to see this. But I like to think she knew. I like to think she's watching now. And I hope wherever she is, she's resting. Because we've got it from here. The applause that followed was thunderous. Later, after the formalities, the sisters sat together beneath a soft-lit olive tree, each holding a glass of champagne. We did it, Isabella said. Sofia added. We survived it. Elena nodded. We started something that's going to last. Richard joined them moments later, holding a small velvet box. I wanted to give you something tonight, he said, handing the box to Elena. Inside was a pendant, gold and silver, woven in the shape of a marigold. At its center, a single pearl. It's for all of you, he said. The marigold was Carmen's favorite flower. She said it could grow through concrete. Just like all of you, the sisters touched it in reverence. A new heirloom. From a distance, cameras flashed. But for once, the moment wasn't about the press. It was about a family once broken. Now rebuilt, not by blood alone, but by loyalty, honesty, and the power of showing up when it mattered most. As the stars emerged above the Pacific, Sofia lifted her glass. To Mama, to truth, Isabella added. To everything we never imagined, Lena finished. They clinked their glasses, and somewhere beyond the veil of memory, a woman who had once scrubbed hotel bathrooms and baked bread at dawn smiled knowing. Her daughters had not just found their father. They had found their voice. They had found each other. They had come full circle. The end. Don't forget to like, comment, and share so others get to watch too. Subscribe for more.